French fries are one of the most widely eaten side dishes in the world. Their great taste and texture, at least in most cases, their ease of preparation, simple and cheap ingredients has made them one of the most common foods on the planet. However, most people don't think twice about the origins of these golden sticks of wonder. The story of the French fry is one that encapsulates ancient farming practices, exploration, globalization, mass production, marketing, and yes, quite a lot of obesity. Before I begin into the history of French fries, I want to point out that I'll be using fries in the American or North American sense of the term, as the terminology changes depending on where you're speaking from. For example, the Brits refer to fries as chips and potato chips as crisps. Because the UK has such a vast empire, many people around the world adopted British terminology rather than American terminology. In Australian English, for example, chips are used to refer to both French fries in terms of the American terminology and crisps in terms of the British terminology. However, they'll sometimes distinguish from the two by calling fries hot chips. To add to more confusion to the term, in the UK, chips oftentimes refer specifically to those thick steak-cut fries with fish and chips. Now, moving on. We all know that fries are made up of radishes. Sorry, let me fact check that. Sorry, that's wrong. They're actually made up from potatoes. And potatoes are one of the most important staple crops in the world. They're one of the most important forms of carbohydrates. And in sharp contrast to most other frequently consumed types of carbohydrates, they are not a grain, like wheat or rice, but instead are a root vegetable composed predominantly of starches. Granted, the main reason why we consume those aforementioned grains is because humans love starch. Starch is a very common carbohydrate found in various cereal crops and other plants, including potatoes, which aren't cereal crops. These starches are composed of chain molecules with a number of glucose units. Glucose is a simple type of sugar, after all. It is used to produce cellulose, which is very common in the structure of plants, but humans cannot consume cellulose properly. We can't digest it. This is why we can't eat grass on a field. Maybe if you grow an extra 3 stomachs, you'll be able to do so, but unless you're a cow, chances are you cannot eat cellulose. Starches, on the other hand, digest pretty easily, and they happen to be almost ubiquitous throughout most of the plants we eat, in various forms. Humans domesticated many plants that had high starch contents to produce even more starch. And while the nutritional value was always the best, it certainly was great for calories at a time when calories were scarce. Something that clearly doesn't exist today in the age of mass production of the French fry. And we'll get to that later. What makes the history of the potato particularly fascinating, though, is that they are native to the Americas, specifically South America, one of the most isolated parts of the world. The natural origin of the potato most likely rests in northern Chile. This is really the most southern point of the Andean cultural civilization, as various Andean cultures had trade networks that would stretch across much of the mountains, primarily in the warmer parts of this mountain range. Eventually, one of these potatoes, or perhaps a group of them, would find their ways to the shores of Lake Titicaca. And yes, I'm fully aware that Lake Titicaca sounds amusing, but it's an Andean term, native to one of the indigenous languages. The lake itself is pretty amazing. It's one of the highest navigable lakes in the world at an elevation of nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. This is because it's high up in the Andes Mountains, where it collects much of the glacial meltwater, and is surrounded by mountain peaks, which keeps the lake intact. On top of that, this area is very close to the equator, so even though it's high up in the mountains, it actually has more of a temperate climate. In sharp contrast to the snow-capped peaks of the mountains, or the lush jungles to the east of the Andes. This unique geography of the Andes would become the foundation of various Andean cultures of what are now Peru, Bolivia, parts of Chile, and Ecuador. This place is so cold that they literally have floating villages made up of greens, and many of these people would cultivate a variety of different potatoes. Any plant that could survive this high up in the mountains had to be pretty tough, and this was the perfect food for a tough group of alpine people. The homeland of what are now known as the potatoes, Peru and Bolivia, have over 200 varieties of these plants. One of the most famous is most likely the Peruvian purple. These indigenous peoples would selectively breed potatoes for certain traits, for waxy textures, others for more starchy textures, and it would be the more starchy ones that eventually become the basis for the potatoes we use for making fries, namely the russet potato. Eventually, the Spaniards would go about conquering much of South and Central America at a time when the Incan Empire was still the dominant force in the Andes during the 1500s. They had already been struggling through a civil war and the rise of smallpox due to European contact. The Spaniards quickly defeated the uprisings and the main Incan Empire and eventually would bring potatoes back to Europe. For a period of time, European elites would look down on potatoes. Some even thought that they were toxic, and as a result, they would oftentimes become food for pigs and eventually the poor. Due to this ability to thrive in relatively poor soil conditions, such as those found in much of Peru, with limited water and colder temperatures, potatoes became a natural staple crop for much of Western Europe. Because potatoes are so cheap and easy to produce, they played a significant role in the rise of populations across much of the continent. In sharp contrast to Peru, where you get a great deal of genetic diversity, however, these European potatoes by and large had a series of monocultures that made these cultivars very susceptible to fungal diseases, the most infamous of which is the Irish potato famine, which caused a mass movement of Irish people who were eating potatoes to the United States. The exact origin of French fries, specifically, is a little bit more difficult to ascertain. It probably came from the Spaniards, who were the first ones to fry potatoes, and it is probably likely that the indigenous peoples of the Andes region had some versions of frying these vegetables as well. However, due to a lack of written records, we can't confirm any of this. We do have good written records from France and Belgium. There's still a dispute one of these two nations would really invent the fry, or who of the two did so. But regardless of this, keep in mind that Belgium has a majority ethnic group called the Walloons who speak a variant of French, so I guess the term French fries still belongs to both of them. Once the stigma of the potato was gone, fries eventually became the food of the elite, particularly the French elite. One of the first recorded mentions of fries in the United States actually comes from Thomas Jefferson, who served as the ambassador to France. It's at the time that fries were considered a status symbol, a symbol of wealth and power and possibly even French pretentiousness. However, this wouldn't last long. After the horrors of potato famine in Ireland and various other blights in Europe, farmers and scientists would look for more genetic diversity in their potato crop. This wasn't just for the sake of keeping potatoes alive, but was also done to ensure that they were tastier and provided more calories by crossbreeding potatoes that had more starchy content. One of the most famous producers of these starchy russet potatoes would be the state of Idaho, known for its alpine climate, a testament to how tough potatoes truly are. European countries were also experimenting with different methods of preparing fries. For example, the UK would produce chips, which are large steak-cut fries. The French would experiment with waffle fries, and the French Canadians would top fries in gravy and cheese curds. By the 1800s, you saw mass industrialization. However, it wouldn't be for over half a century later when the mass consumer culture would emerge in the aftermath of World War II. Soldiers would return home to their wives and have a lot of babies, hence the baby boom. This resulted in massive population growth that would require not only a lot of food, but a lot of processed food, and sometimes even some fast food. You may have heard of this obscure restaurant. Now, no shame if you have never heard of it. It's not too many people know about it. It's called McDonald's. Well, McDonald's would emerge during the 1950s. Ray Kroc, the quasi-founder of the McDonald's Corporation, not exactly the founder of McDonald's, look it up, would eventually team up with a potato company from Idaho. They would make use of the newfound freezing technology to preserve fries through long logistical chains. On top of that, in the Canadian Maritimes, McCain's Foods would be founded during the same decade of the 1950s. McCain's would not invest in restaurants, but rather more on large processing of frozen fries that could be sold at supermarkets around the world. This would eventually make it one of the major staples for diners and fast food restaurants. In fact, Ray Kroc wanted to invest not only in the production of fries, but also in the science of fries, and would set up a food lab in the outskirts of Chicago. in order to study the food chemistry behind potatoes and onions. The methodology of Ray Kroc's lab and the McCain's Food Corporation would basically solidify the potato's role as producing a fry that is crunchy in its exterior but soft in its interior. The rise of globalization and international logistical supply chains and the love of fries would not be relegated to Europe and the United States, but rather spread across much of the world. Many cultures, which don't have any particularly deep history of growing, let alone eating potatoes, have taken up their own spin on the French fry. One of the most common examples is the tornado potatoes, which are popular in South Korea as a street food. Today at the store, a variety of various types of fries can be found in virtually any developed or quasi-developed country in the supermarket: crinkle-cut fries, wedge fries, and others. Some aren't even made up of white potatoes. Some come from sweet potatoes, which aren't really potatoes. And the methodology of preparing them has become just as diverse, from topping them with gravy to guacamole to chili powder to countless other varieties. Fries are a testament to our species' ingenuity. The way that we've turned these lumps of brown roots to a multi-billion-dollar industry is a testament to our creativity that has provided livelihoods for tens of millions of people, subsistence for millions upon millions more, and perhaps shorter lives due to the obesity epidemic. Thanks for watching.